We're going in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what is going on, everyone? Tay here. And it has been a while since I've done like a long, like 40-minute plus video. And that's what we're going to do today. And we're just going to have a lot of fun with it and really go down the rabbit hole talking about different theories and leaks and reports and ideas regarding what's going to happen in Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, specifically when it comes to stuff with Tony Stark, Wanda Maximoff, and some of the new returning surprise X-Men characters, along with other surprise characters and cameos that we will see in the upcoming Avengers movies, and all sorts of stuff. And today's video is actually a super thanks video where I'm going to be responding to a handful of super thanks questions that we've had from the last few videos. So yeah, it is going to be a long one, and I will include video chapters so you guys can, jump around to different topics if you'd like. Hopefully you just watch the whole thing, but with it being a longer one, I get it if you don't. And I know this video is actually a few days late, so my apologies on that. I have a brand new computer that I've been using that totally crashed out on me right after getting it, so I had to take it back to the shop and get it fixed. And I had already gotten this video like 80% finished once already. But even though it was a total pain to have to deal with that and wait for it so I could start working again, I think it actually made the video better because this second version of the video is way more in depth and just more fun and down the rabbit hole on stuff that I didn't cover the first time around. And then just real quick, I wanted to give a quick shout out to regulars of the channel, Primo1147 and also Aaron, because I saw some comments from them saying that they left some super thanks for the last super thanks video that I missed for some reason. And I did go back and try to find those. I couldn't see them anywhere. I went back and looked in the past like 2 months of videos and could not find them. Now, honestly, I have noticed that the super thanks system has been a little bit glitchy lately. I mean, for the most part, everything seems to be fine, but I have seen it before where I'll see a comment and then go back later to screen cap it for the video, and it's just disappeared. Now, like I said, this is rare. It's not something that I've seen happen a lot, but I have noticed some issues that have been frustrating. So yeah, I'm sorry to you guys. I have no doubt that you did leave those super thanks questions, and just wanted to give you guys a shout out. Thank you very much for leaving those. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry about that. And yeah, hopefully we don't have any problems in the future. So on that vote of confidence, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that I will get to those in one of the next videos, and hopefully that doesn't dissuade people too much, but I definitely wanted to bring it up and mention it and give you guys a shout out and let you know I appreciate you. So yeah, on that note, let's get to the super thanks questions for today's video. And the first ones we'll cover are the ones without questions, which we have one from Blackfire Warrior. And then we also have, I think, 4, maybe even 5 from regular to the channel, Gator Chris. So yeah, Chris, Blackfire Warrior, I always appreciate you guys. And then the first one with the question we have is from Simmersea245. And this one says, "Thank you for answering my last question. Now I have a potentially difficult one. So we've had a variety of different leaks coming out for Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars over the last few years, but nothing that one would call concrete when it comes to the return of Wanda. Given Elizabeth Olsen's busy filming schedule, do you think that there's a possibility that she may not return at all until after Secret Wars is over, or could we even be looking at a potential recast at this point?" Alright, this is a good question, dude. Because you're right, even though we have heard various leaks regarding Marvel Studios' plans for Wanda in the upcoming Avengers films and beyond that, none of that can be 100% confirmed. We just have to go by what's been out in these different reports. However, that said, I definitely don't think that Wanda is going to be recast, and I do think that she will definitely appear in the upcoming Avengers films. The bigger question is just how big will her role actually be. And originally what we heard from some of the earlier leaks is that Wanda will return in Avengers Doomsday as one of Doctor Doom's main allies, with the story possibly adapting elements from the Children's Crusade comic. However, then more recently, as I'm sure many of you guys know, there's also been these newer reports and these newer leaks saying that the version of Wanda that we will see in Avengers Doomsday will actually be a variant of Wanda from the X-Men universe that we saw at the end of the Marvels and that we know will be a huge part of the plot in Avengers Doomsday, and that this version of Wanda will be Magneto's daughter and a part of his Brotherhood of Mutants. Because what we've heard from various different reports regarding Magneto's role in Avengers Doomsday is that he will be the leader of the Brotherhood of Mutants in the movie from this other X-Men universe, and that his team will include his children, Wanda, Quicksilver, and Polaris, who will be kind of like co-leaders helping him lead the other mutants that also follow them. And the more I think about it, the more I think that something like this makes a lot of sense. Because we know that Kevin Feige, Ian McKellen, and Elizabeth Olsen have all been talking about this for years now. That their dream for those characters is to figure out a way to bring Wanda and Magneto together. And with these upcoming Avengers movies, this is really the last chance that Marvel Studios has to make something like that happen, with these specific actors. And considering the story that they are doing with Doomsday and Secret Wars, it actually would line up with that story. So it's not just the last chance they have to do it, but it's also something that would actually make sense with the plot. And one of the main theories that I've had since we've heard this report that the Brotherhood would be in Avengers Doomsday is that perhaps they could take on a similar role to that of the Cabal in Jonathan Hickman's Incursion saga. Because in that story, in the Time Runs Out story, the Cabal are one of the secondary villain teams who are destroying the Earths of other universes in order to stop the incursions. So they are trying to stop the incursions in order to save their worlds. They're just being way too brutal about it and have no moral compunction about destroying entire civilizations to do so. And if we do see something like that in Avengers Doomsday, it makes me wonder if it could kind of line up with one of the newer scoops that we heard from Daniel Richman. Because he had a scoop that came out recently where he said something along the lines of the biggest threat in Avengers Doomsday to the 616 universe will be the X-Men universe. And when I heard that, it kind of raised my eyebrows a little bit, because what we've heard in past leaks is that after the initial X-Mansion battle between the X-Men and the Avengers, is that the X-Men and the Avengers will actually end up joining forces to try and stop the incursions and defeat Doctor Doom together. So it makes me wonder if maybe the true threat from the X-Men universe won't actually be the X-Men at all, but it will be Magneto and the Brotherhood, and that their goal will be to destroy the 616 universe in order to save their world from the incursions, very similar to what the Cabal did in the Time Runs Out story. Because it's already been confirmed that there are going to be other big villains in Avengers Doomsday besides just Doctor Doom. So maybe who some of those other main villains will end up being could be Wanda, Magneto, and the Brotherhood, and perhaps we could even see those characters joining forces with Doctor Doom. Because with Marvel Studios already having turned the 616 version of Wanda into a villain in Multiverse of Madness, I'm not really sure they would want to repeat that and turn her into a villain again for Avengers Doomsday, because for one, they've already done it, and also because it would kind of undo the bit of redemption she had at the end of that movie by destroying the Darkhold. However, what I could see the Russo brothers doing is introducing a variant of Wanda from this X-Men universe as the daughter of Magneto, and that perhaps she could be the one who kind of takes on more of a villain role, or at least an antagonist role, and then they could save the return of the 616 version of Wanda for Avengers Secret Wars. Because I'm not sure if you guys remember this or not, but earlier this year, the Russo brothers actually included a very blatant Scarlet Witch Easter egg in their movie Electric State when we saw one of the robots reading an issue of West Coast Avengers. It was specifically issue 56, which has Wanda prominently featured on the cover. And I talked about this back when that movie came out, and still to this day, I think that this Easter egg could be a pretty big hint at the Russo brothers' plans for Wanda. Because this specific issue of West Coast Avengers is the beginning of the Darker Than Scarlet story, which revolves around Wanda having a nervous breakdown and turning against the Avengers, placing her as the primary antagonist of the story. However, what I find especially interesting about this comic and how it could tie into the upcoming Avengers films is some of the other main characters in this story, like Magneto, Quicksilver, and Immortus. Because in this comic, Magneto and Quicksilver also play a pretty big role in this story, with it actually being revealed that Magneto is one of the characters who's been manipulating Wanda and is encouraging her to take on a more villainous role to turn against the Avengers so she can help him defeat them. But then the other character I mentioned is Immortus, because one of the other things that's later revealed in this story is that Immortus has also been manipulating Wanda's life for many years now from behind the scenes, because he's been playing a long game where he wants to use Wanda's powers as a Nexus being to help him take over the multiverse. And what happens at the end of the story is that Wanda does actually end up teaming up with Immortus to help him take over the multiverse, but then Agatha Harkness swoops in at the very last second and is able to break Wanda free from her spell. And the reason I just recap that again real quick is because maybe the reason that the Russo brothers included this as an Easter egg in Electric State is because this could be one of the key storylines that they are using as inspiration when it comes to both Wanda and Magneto's roles in Avengers Doomsday, where it could be revealed that Magneto is influencing this variant of Wanda, who's his daughter, to help him go against the Avengers and the X-Men, and maybe even to team up with Doctor Doom the same way that Wanda ended up teaming up with Immortus. Because what I could easily see happening in Doomsday is that when the Avengers arrive in the X-Men universe to rescue Monica and stop the incursion, that Magneto and the Brotherhood could initially come to the X-Mansion to help the X-Men to defeat these multiversal foes, because, of course, when the Avengers first arrive, the X-Men won't know who they are. But that once things finally calm down a little bit and the action stops, that the Avengers could explain to the X-Men what they are doing there, and that an incursion is about to occur between their two universes, and that they need to work together to figure out a way to stop it. And from there, I think Professor X and the X-Men would likely agree to work with the Avengers, but that Magneto and the Brotherhood might not be so easy to convince. Because remember, according to past leaks, how the Avengers and the X-Men will plan to stop the incursions is by going to the TVA to help them save Loki from Doctor Doom in order to save the whole multiverse. However, if something like that's what happens, if that is the kind of storyline we are going to see, Magneto might not be so quick to trust the Avengers because he could see their plan as way too much of a threat to his world. So this could end up being a dividing point in the movie where the X-Men decide to join sides with the Avengers to stop Doctor Doom, but that maybe Magneto and the Brotherhood will go the opposite route, to where their plan could actually be to try and destroy the 616 universe in order to save their world, and that maybe this could even lead them to joining forces with Doctor Doom because they see him as the one with the better chance of winning. However, like I said a minute ago, no matter what happens in Avengers Doomsday, I definitely think we will see the 616 version of Wanda return and play a big role in Avengers Secret Wars. Now, of course, we don't know how exactly she'll return because we still don't know for sure what happened to her after Multiverse of Madness. One possibility is that she could be resurrected by Franklin Richards, similar to how Franklin resurrected Sue at the end of Fantastic Four. Or another possibility is that maybe Wanda is being held in some kind of stasis at the TVA, similar to what we saw in the recent TVA comic run that was initially supposed to have some kind of connection to the MCU, but now we're not so sure. Or another possibility is that maybe Wanda could be rescued from the past by someone using time travel, which is actually something I'm going to talk about in the next comment in a second. But like I said, no matter what, I do think we'll see her return. Because for one thing, if you guys remember back in WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, there were two very important scenes where we heard about this prophecy of the Scarlet Witch and how the Scarlet Witch is destined to either destroy the world or rule or destroy the cosmos.
The Scarlet Witch is not born, she is forged.
Your power exceeds that of the Sorcerer Supreme. It's your destiny to destroy the world.
Scarlet Witch is a being of unfathomable magic. She can rewrite reality as she chooses, and is prophesied to either rule or annihilate the cosmos.
She could enslave the entire multiverse.
And I know there's still several loose plot threads that Marvel Studios have yet to wrap up, especially from Phase 4. But this prophecy is definitely one of those things that I do think that the Russo brothers will tie back to, because Marvel made a big point of referencing this prophecy in 2 different projects, one of which was Multiverse of Madness, which, as we know, was written by Michael Waldron. And considering that McFeely and the Russo brothers are still working off of Michael Waldron's original story idea for the upcoming Avengers films, and that Waldron is on the set working with them throughout the filming process, I do think that a lot of what is going to happen in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars will tie back to Michael Waldron's previous projects, like Loki and Multiverse of Madness. So yeah, I definitely think that this prophecy will come back and be a part of the story for the 2 upcoming Avengers films, or at least one of them. The bigger question is just how will it be a factor? Well, one theory that I talked about a while ago is that perhaps Doctor Doom could somehow harness the power of the Scarlet Witch and then use that power to shred down the multiverse to one single timeline, and that maybe he could use the power of the Scarlet Witch to form that timeline into his own perfect reality that he can then rule over as Battleworld in Avengers Secret Wars. And one thing we have to remember when it comes to this prophecy is that the 616 version of Wanda is the only version of Wanda across the multiverse that holds the power of the Scarlet Witch. So this prophecy definitely needs to be the 616 version of Wanda, not some other variant of Wanda. And I do still think that this theory of Doom using the power of the Scarlet Witch to help him, recreate the multiverse or to rule over Battleworld or whatever could definitely be what'll happen. That theory does line up to me. However, like I mentioned, it's also very possible that the 616 version of Wanda won't show up until Avengers Secret Wars. Because we all know that Avengers Doomsday is likely going to end with Doctor Doom taking over control of the multiverse and somehow gaining godlike abilities just like he did in the comics. And once he gains those powers, he will be nearly unstoppable, so the Scarlet Witch may be the only character powerful enough to actually stop him. So regardless of what happens with Wanda in Avengers Doomsday, and if we see the real Wanda or a variant of Wanda, I do think that there's a good chance that the Scarlet Witch, the 616 Wanda, will actually end up playing a key role in defeating Doctor Doom and saving the multiverse at the end of Avengers Secret Wars, and this is how she will fully redeem herself after her full villain turn in Multiverse of Madness. And maybe this ending is how the prophecy of the Scarlet Witch will end up being fulfilled. Because in WandaVision, the Darkhold said that the Scarlet Witch is destined to destroy the world. And then in Multiverse of Madness, Wong said that the Scarlet Witch is destined to rule the cosmos. So the way they laid that out leaves that prophecy pretty open to interpretation to go down a few different ways. So maybe one way that the prophecy could play out at the end of Avengers Secret Wars is that Wanda could be the one to help defeat Doctor Doom, and that maybe she will be the one who will destroy Doctor Doom's new timeline so that they can recreate the multiverse and reset the MCU. So maybe the world that the Scarlet Witch is destined to destroy is Doom's world, Battleworld. Because something I've talked about before is that I do think that Wanda could play a key role in the multiversal reset of the MCU. Because what happened at the end of the Secret Wars comics is we saw Reed Richards, Molecule Man, and Franklin all working together to recreate the multiverse, which then led to a soft reset and a soft reboot of the Marvel Comics universe. And Kevin Feige has already confirmed that we will see some kind of soft reset of the MCU at the end of Avengers Secret Wars for the next saga. And I think there's a good chance that it will go down very similar to how it happened in the comics, but that maybe instead of it being Reed, Franklin, and Molecule Man, that it could be Reed, Franklin, and Wanda, and that Wanda could be the one to kind of help shape those realities, with Franklin being the one providing the power and actually creating the universes. And one of the reasons I think it also makes sense for Marvel Studios to do something like this with Wanda being the one to kind of help recreate the multiverse is it could also provide Marvel Studios with a way to introduce mutants into the MCU 616 universe, into the Prime timeline, sort of taking some influence from the House of M story. So yeah, basically all of this has been a very long-winded answer to your question, in that I definitely don't think that Marvel Studios are done with Elizabeth Olsen in any way. In fact, I think it's most likely going to be the complete opposite of that, to where she will play a big role in the upcoming Avengers movies, but that they're just keeping a lid on it because they don't want to surprise her role, especially because it'll probably be an important role. And I also think that Marvel Studios have some big plans for Wanda after the multiverse saga is over in the next saga. So yeah, thank you very much for that super thanks, Simmersy. Very much appreciate it. And let's get on to this next comment we have from KindaCulty Films. And this one actually isn't a super thanks, but it is just a fun theory and a fun question. And since I really appreciate you guys supporting the channel, I figured, not every question has to come from a super thanks. And this comment comes from a video that I did earlier last month regarding the different leaks we've heard about Steve Rogers accidentally causing an incursion by creating a new timeline with Peggy back in the 1940s, and how that will reportedly play a very big role in the plot of Avengers Doomsday. All right, so this one says, unfortunately, I don't have any money on my card for a super thanks. But isn't it possible that Steve's branch timeline didn't cause an incursion or hurt Doom in any way, but that it is instead what created Doctor Doom? Because that could explain why Doctor Doom looks like RDJ. That maybe Steve somehow created a scenario where Tony wouldn't become a hero and his life is completely altered. Because there is evidence to suggest that Tony might have actually been adopted by the Starks. So maybe in Steve's timeline, that event never happened and his life turned out to be tragic, leading to him becoming Doctor Doom, and that this could end up enraging him once he learns what his life could have truly been. Because we also know that Tony's death is supposed to factor into Avengers Doomsday, and that time travel will also be involved with the set reports we've heard about Doom going back in time to Steve's timeline in the 1940s. So with Wanda, what if Doctor Doom recognized her potential and traveled back in time to save her and also restore the Darkhold? That what if Doom uses dreamwalking to take over Tony just after he died? Because something like this would give him the scars, and it would also greatly improve the chances of the 616 Avengers following him. Because all he would have to say is, I come from a timeline identical to your own, only I survived the snap, and then he could gain the trust of the whole world. Alright, so I'm glad I saw this comment, KindaCulty Films, because I do think that there are at least parts of this theory that could definitely end up being accurate. Now, as far as the theory that's out there suggesting that the MCU version of Tony might have been adopted, this partially comes from the comics, and then it also partially comes from this scene between Tony and Howard in Avengers Endgame, when Howard tells him when his wife is due, and Tony kind of gets this confused look on his face. And I've talked about this theory myself in past videos. But what I didn't know at that time is that apparently the Russo brothers actually debunked this theory that Tony was adopted during the commentary of Avengers Endgame. So knowing that now definitely makes that possibility seem, much less likely. However, I do think that there could be something to the idea that Steve could be the one responsible for creating Doom, and that it could somehow tie into, the 616 version of Tony, or at least a, close variant to the 616 version of Tony. And I definitely think that whatever the reason is for why Doom looks like Tony, that a huge part of that will be so that he can gain the trust of the heroes from the 616 universe. Which, if that is the case, then this definitely lends a lot of credibility to the theory that Doctor Doom will actually be Victor Von Doom, who has somehow assumed the identity of a Tony Stark, instead of Doom being a Tony Stark variant who has somehow become Doctor Doom. Because if you guys remember, back in August, Robert Downey Jr. posted some behind-the-scenes photos with 3 different comics, which included the original 1984 Secret Wars, and then more importantly, the West Coast Avengers issue number 35, and also Iron Man Legacy of Doom. And while there was no context for these photos, This did seem to be a strong hint that these could be some of the comics that Robert Downey Jr. has been looking to for inspiration regarding the plan for Doctor Doom in the upcoming Avengers films. And when it comes to these comics, specifically the West Coast Avengers and Iron Man Legacy of Doom, this does again seem to be somewhat of a hint at the possibility of a Victor Von Doom taking on the identity of Tony Stark instead of the whole Stark variant idea. And what this makes me think about is those comments we heard from Chris Claremont a little while back. Because back at a comic convention earlier in the summer, Chris Claremont made some revealing comments where he said that he had heard that both Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. will be playing numerous different roles in the upcoming Avengers films, with Chris Evans playing Steve Rogers, Old Man Steve, and a more villainous version of Captain America, possibly Captain Hydra, and that Robert Downey Jr. will also be playing multiple roles, with it including Doctor Doom, Iron Man, and possibly even 2 other roles. And since we're talking about Chris Claremont and stuff he's spoiling at conventions, and since we were also just talking about Wanda and whether or not she will be in the upcoming Avengers films, I should probably also mention that one of the other characters that Chris Claremont spoiled and said would be returning is Wanda Maximoff. And he said that even though Elizabeth Olsen is currently claiming that she's not going to be in the upcoming Avengers films, that she actually will be, and that we are finally going to see her return as a heroic version of Wanda. Because if you think about it, we haven't really seen a full-on heroic version of Wanda since Avengers Infinity War, because in Avengers Endgame, she was all about getting revenge against Thanos, and then in WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, she was kind of losing her mind and corrupted by the Darkhold. And like I was saying earlier, while I do think that we could definitely see another variant of Wanda in Avengers Doomsday, I do think it's important and likely that we will see the 616 version of Wanda return in Avengers Secret Wars in a big heroic way, so she can get her redemption after all of the horrible stuff she did, especially in Multiverse of Madness. And those comments that Chris Claremont made about the different characters that we will see in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, those came out months ago. But recently, there has actually been a lot of talk about all of the crazy, unexpected surprises that we will see occur in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, both with the actual events of those movies, but also with all of these super secret surprise characters and cameos that no one knows about. For instance, we've been hearing all sorts of hype on how good the plot of the movie is and how great the Russo brothers are doing. And we had director Shane Black recently saying that the Russo brothers are going to revitalize the comic book movie genre, especially with everything they're doing with Doctor Doom. And then also in a recent interview with Channing Tatum, he said that there are moments in Avengers Doomsday that are literally like 50 times bigger than the surprises we saw in Deadpool and Wolverine, and that fans are going to absolutely lose their minds when they see the movie. And of course, with this being a multiversal film that is adapting the Secret Wars comics, of course it's going to have tons of different cameos and crazy characters in it because this is just the perfect opportunity, and really one of the last opportunities that Marvel Studios will have to do something this crazy. Which, one of the things that I've been seeing online a lot lately that I think is way overblown is all this talk about the Russo brothers making Avengers Doomsday without a finished script. And that's not the case. And what the Russo brothers are doing is the exact same thing that they did with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And how it's going down, from what I understand, is that they have the overall premise and the overall plot and story of the movie and all of the big main characters, all of that is written out. But because they are dealing with such a gigantic cast where you're going to have all these other surprise characters and cameos and all that stuff, you're working around a ton of different actors' schedules who are extremely busy. So the way they have to do it is they have to have contingency plans for different characters in case someone can't make it to the set or it doesn't work out for some reason. And this is kind of like what they did with Captain America Civil War. I don't know if you guys remember this, but back when they were directing Captain America Civil War, they didn't know for sure if Tom Holland was going to be able to appear in the movie as Spider-Man because Marvel Studios and Disney were still figuring out the deal with Sony when the movie was already filming. So they had one version of the movie that they were hoping was going to work out with Spider-Man, and then they had another version of the script that didn't include Spider-Man and included Black Panther in a bigger role. And, they had to do a similar kind of thing with Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, where because the cast was so big, they had characters that they were hoping to have work in certain roles, but then they had to have contingency plans in case certain actors weren't able to be on set the whole time or their schedules didn't work. So then they would have second and third options for other characters who could kind of fill those roles if the first choice didn't work out. So yeah, when it comes to like the core storyline and plot of Avengers Doomsday, that's all figured out. But because they're working with all these different actors' schedules, they have to keep some of the different roles a little bit open for the possibility of different characters. And that's why they have Stephen McFeely and Michael Waldron on set throughout the whole filming process, so they can always be on top of things and doing rewrites or what they call plussing the script if need be, based on how filming is evolving. But anyways, I kind of got off on a little tangent there, but I do still want to talk about some of the other big surprise characters and cameos that we are going to see in these movies. And of course, we can't possibly know who all of these different surprise characters will be that we will see in the upcoming Avengers films. I mean, of course, there are some obvious ones like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield returning as their versions of Spider-Man, or more characters coming back from the Fox Fantastic Four movies. But then besides that, it is a bit more of guesswork and just going off of rumors. But based on some of those rumors out there, we have heard that some of the Void characters from Deadpool and Wolverine, like Laura and Blade, will be returning. There's also been reports and rumors of a new variant of Black Panther being introduced. And I do think that that is something that's probably going to happen based on the concept art that came out earlier this year, which depicted Damson Idris as Azuri the Wise, who in the comics is T'Challa's grandfather. And then more recently, one of the more interesting characters that I saw some rumors about possibly coming back is Ben Foster as Angel, which I just got to say, I really hope that's true because Ben Foster is an incredibly underrated actor, and he really wasn't given a chance to shine as Angel in X-Men 3 because that movie sucks so much. So I would love to see him get a second chance at that character in one of the upcoming Avengers films. And one of the things that Chris Claremont said about all of the surprise characters that we will see in these movies, specifically when it comes to the X-Men, is that according to him, Marvel Studios was basically able to get the entire original Fox X-Men cast to agree to return, but that the one character they were having a hard time nailing down was Famke Janssen, but that eventually they even got her to sign on to return as Jean Grey. Now, he didn't clarify which movie Jean would appear in, if it would be Doomsday or Secret Wars or both. But if he is right, and we are going to see her return as Jean Grey, then another moment we could see that fans have been waiting to see on screen for years now is an epic battle between Jean and Wanda. And if the leaks we are hearing about Magneto's Brotherhood and a variant of Wanda showing up as a part of that team in Avengers Doomsday are accurate, then that could be the kind of thing that could open the door for that battle between Jean and Wanda to take place. Because if those other past leaks we've heard are true, and the X-Men do eventually team up with the Avengers, then of course this could possibly put the Brotherhood at odds with the X-Men and put those two teams on the opposite side of the fence. And I know that everyone's been talking a lot about all of the big Marvel characters that we could see return from past franchises, like the Sony Fantastic Four cast, or Blade, or, of course, the Fox X-Men cast. But the other thing that's also important to remember is that it's also been confirmed that new characters will also be appearing in these movies, with some of those characters just being cameos, but then others being big leading characters that we'll see in their own movies in the future. So for instance, some of the mutant characters that Chris Claremont mentioned that we've heard about, is Psylocke and Polaris, who will reportedly be played by new actors. But then recently, there's also been reports that the MCU version of Ghost Rider will be introduced in Avengers Doomsday, and that he will be played by a big-name actor, and that it will set him up to appear in the next saga after Secret Wars, probably in his own Ghost Rider project. And you know, those are just 3 characters we've heard about off the top of my head, but the Russo brothers have said that Avengers Secret Wars is going to be a new beginning for the MCU. So I do think that there will likely be other new characters besides that will be introduced who could play some big roles to be set up in future projects afterwards. So yeah, even though we all know that these movies are going to be crazy, I really do think they're going to be even crazier than we expect them to be. Because like I said, one of the other things we are hearing reports about is big name actors returning to play multiple different versions and variants of characters. You know, I just talked about what Chris Claremont said about Chris Evans playing possibly 3 different versions of Steve Rogers, and how Robert Downey Jr. could even go on to have 4 different roles in the movie, including Doctor Doom and different versions of Tony Stark. Now, of course, we don't know how Chris Claremont would have this information, but he is a comic legend who does still work at Marvel, and him and John Byrne are the writers who created the classic X-Men comics that the Russo brothers have called out as the comics that were the biggest influences on them as kids. So it definitely wouldn't be shocking for the Russo brothers to possibly have had discussions with Chris Claremont about some of their story ideas for Doomsday and Secret Wars, especially considering that we know that the X-Men will have a large role in those movies. So yeah, with his position at Marvel, it's not at all crazy that he could have some legit inside information on what's going to happen in these Avengers movies, and that maybe with his status at the company, he just wasn't that worried about letting a few spoilers slip. But you know, if this is going to be the case, and that Doctor Doom truly will be Victor Von Doom, who has somehow taken on the identity of a Tony Stark variant, then I do think that there's a good chance that what Chris Claremont said is right, and that we will see Robert Downey Jr. also appearing as other versions of Tony Stark or Iron Man. Because for one, I do think during these movies, we will likely see flashback scenes to Doctor Doom's origin story, which could include how he took on the identity of Tony Stark and what happened to that other Tony Stark variant, if there was one. And then I do think there's a strong possibility that we could see a heroic version of Tony Stark also return at some point, maybe in Avengers Secret Wars. But, you know, the other question that this does bring up is how will this tie to the events of Avengers Endgame? Because we have to remember that the Russo brothers did say that the events of Avengers Doomsday would somehow tie into the death of Tony Stark and the ending of Avengers Endgame. And based on those recent set reports we've heard about Doctor Doom going back in time to Steve's timeline in the 1940s, on top of the fact that the movie is going to be about the multiverse in general, we know that multiversal and time travel technology will likely be a very big part of the movie. Because we know that Doom will likely have some version of this technology, and then we also know that the TVA has this kind of technology, and then on top of that, there's also the Quantum Bands and America Chavez, plus any kind of multiversal tech that the Fantastic Four may have. And like the above comment from Culty Films points out, with multiversal and time travel technology being a big part of the story, this does open up the possibility for people to go back in time to potentially grab other characters from the past. And with the past comments from the Russo brothers about Doomsday connecting back to Tony's death, on top of all the reports we've heard about Chris Evans returning as the 616 version of Steve Rogers, this does make me wonder if we could also see the actual 616 version of Tony coming back somehow. And, you know, Chris Claremont said that we could potentially see Robert Downey Jr. even playing multiple roles, you know, more than 2. And I don't know if that will be the case, but another possibility that we have to consider is that we could also possibly see Robert Downey Jr. playing a variant of Tony Stark from the 838 universe that we saw introduced in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And, you know, this does make a lot of sense because there have been reports that the 838 universe will somehow factor into the plot of Avengers Doomsday. And, you know, I think this makes sense because that could tie back into Doctor Strange's role and what he'll be doing in the movie. Because with all the havoc that Doctor Strange caused in the 838 universe, this is likely the universe that he caused an incursion with that Clea recruited him to fix at the end of Multiverse of Madness. And we have to remember that it was confirmed by Marvel producer Richie Palmer that the 838 variant of Tony Stark was the one who created Ultron there, and that in that universe, the Ultron program went according to plan and did build a suit of armor around the world. So we do know for, you know, basically 100% certainty that a version of Tony Stark does exist in that universe. So if what we've heard about the 838 universe also somehow tying into the plot of Doomsday are accurate, then I think it's definitely a possibility that we could see the 838 version of Tony Stark from that universe, and that could be one of the other characters that Robert Downey Jr. will play. And maybe that would be in Avengers Doomsday, or maybe that's something they might save for Avengers Secret Wars. Because I do think that if we are going to see Robert Downey Jr. also playing a heroic version of Tony Stark, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Russo brothers waited to do that until the Secret Wars movie for some big surprise fan-pleasing moment. Because we have to remember that as big as they are going with Avengers Doomsday, they're going to have to go even bigger for Avengers Secret Wars. So I definitely think they'll save some of those really big surprise moments for the Secret Wars movie. And if Victor Von Doom did somehow steal the identity of a variant of Tony Stark, then who knows? It's even possible that at some point, maybe someone like Wanda could use magic to separate Victor from Tony, and maybe we could even see Robert Downey Jr. switch back to Tony Stark with another actor then taking on the role of Doctor Doom for the rest of the movie. And, you know, if something like that happened and they got a really big actor to play Doctor Doom, maybe we could even see that actor carry on the role of Doctor Doom into the future beyond Avengers Secret Wars, and that if they even wanted to bring back Robert Downey Jr., that he could come back as Tony Stark instead of Doctor Doom. Now, you know, we're getting into a lot of what-if territory with all of that, and it all starts to get very convoluted. So yeah, I think we'll wrap it up here, but thank you very much to Gator Chris, Blackfire Warrior, Simmersea, and also Culty Films. I'm glad you left that comment, and I'm glad I saw it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, just like a loose, fun video. And yeah, if you'd like to leave a super thanks with a comment or a question, I will get to those soon whenever a few have built up. And of course, if you are new to the channel and a fan of Marvel and the MCU and long, detailed videos, please consider subscribing because that does help out the channel a lot, or at least leave a like or share the video. Sharing really helps a lot as well. So yeah, share, like, all that stuff. And remember, you can check out my other videos on Avengers Doomsday, or the last one I did on the Midnight Suns and what's going to happen in Phase 7 with the Supernatural MCU. All that stuff's linked in the description down below. And yeah, I will be back soon with the next one.